Welcome back to Melbourne and to Australia. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, sustainable business growth. What is your definition and what are some key components?
Yes, it's interesting that we're even having that discussion. I think pre the current state of the market, when we're all out fundraising, a lot of it's around growth at all costs. And so it was always looking at top line, top line, top line. I think when you're out raising now, one of the new trends is looking at capital efficiency. And I think this is good, by the way. I think this is a good trend that we're seeing. So now it's not just good enough to say my growth over the last year has been X. It's I applied the capital and I was able to generate X revenue. So what it's about is it's not necessarily that you're in a state of profitability right now, it's that you have a genuine path to profitability. So I think where we're at is adjusted perceptions, but I think we're actually moving in the right direction of creating more sustainable businesses moving forward.
And do you think any impact on that in terms of reconceptualizing and recontextualizing sustainable business growth?
I think it's more the phase we're in now and the market outlook. There were winners, there were losers. COVID was about growth at all costs for businesses like e-commerce businesses where they were seeing upward trends. For others where it was a negative impact, it was around extending your runway. But the phase we're in now is about the markets and where we're at and the market outlook. And so it's not about, battening down the hatches, it's about actually how are you going to grow through this phase. So I think anyone who's at the early stages, growth stages, when we come through this, we'll probably be the best prepared tech businesses ever. We'll have gone through a 1 in 100 year event, and we'll have gone through a major energy crisis, major recession. And if we're still standing at the end of that with a sustainable business, I think we are the businesses to be investing in.
Brilliant. Now, slashed valuations, employee redundancies, reduced funding in FinTech. What are some key observations of yours and what kind of initial lessons should we learn?
Yeah, maybe it's because I'm an entrepreneur and we're always eternal optimists, but actually if you break down the numbers, we all see these major headlines of slashed valuations. The decline of valuations has impacted Series C and thereafter, so over 40% decline. Series B, 25% decline. But actually, if you dig into the numbers, Seed and Series A has still increased by 18% year on year in terms of valuations. And if we all think about it as well, I don't think we should all be doom and gloom and, let's forget about accessing finance here. VCs have a lot of dry powder. They raised at a time when interest rates were low. They are still sitting on a lot of funds that need to be deployed. And if you're in seed or Series A stage, you are young enough to not have so much fixed overheads that you're having to let people go, etc. You'll be at the phase where you're riding this cycle out. So I think for businesses that are at seed Series A, don't be despondent. There is a lot of funding out there. Another point specifically for Australian businesses and why swoop funding exists, we started because we could see global trends happening. So with data sharing, with frameworks like CDR and open banking is becoming global now. Cloud accounting is available. Finance is becoming borderless. So if you are raising, don't just think about the Australian market. And I'm referring to debt as well as equity. So don't just think there's VCs in Australia or there's lenders in Australia. The majority of fintech lenders now are multi-jurisdictional. So we just funded a business this week through the US and the UK, not through an Australian lender. And so I think the options and the market, it has never been better for a business that's looking for growth funding, albeit it's tempered with, yes, more realistic valuations, and yes, you're going to have to prove that your business is capital efficient. But these are all things we should be proving to ourselves as business people anyway.
And do you think that investors nowadays become much more selective or a bit more impatient as well?
I think investors are becoming more responsible, and that might be a little bit controversial to say, but I think sometimes the FOMO effect of VCs has actually led to, I think, the crazy valuations that we've seen, the crazy multiples that we were seeing. And I also have I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. I think 30 by 30, that it's great to have aspirations of creating unicorns, but sometimes we can all get all consumed about reaching unicorn status. This is about, are you developing a business that customers want and that you're doing that in a sustainable way? Sometimes that sort of race to get to unicorn status can actually lead to huge inefficiencies in organizations, which is why you see this increase in employees, reduction in employees when the valuations are hit. So for me, I think it's more around, are we creating businesses that are sustainable, that customers want, and that we're actually delivering a service in FinTech that reduces friction and improves people's lives. I mean, that's fundamentally where we want to go with this.
So you would also suggest that growth is correlated to externalities, basically?
Yes. It's funny, I mean, I was an accountant prior to starting my tech business, and I don't know, back in the old days when you started a business, it was, here's my business strategy, here's my product strategy, and you would then look at your finance strategy to support that. Then the world kind of changed, and there was a lot of VC money around. It was like, people were making business decisions based on, how do I get to this valuation at the next round? How do I get to raise my next 100 million? And it was almost forgetting the customer. It was forgetting the actual business strategy. I think the phase we're moving into now is we're going to find a nice balance. It's going to be about, yes, how do I reach those valuations, but with a capital efficient business. Yeah.
I remember when we had our initial conversation, I was so fascinated with what you told me about the fact that lots of business owners, fintech entrepreneurs, management teams, they lack fundamental finance skills. So there's an increasing gap in financial literacy.
Yeah, it was, again, it came from my initial work of, I had a corporate finance firm, and I wanted to work with businesses that could never afford corporate finance advisors, hence why I had to find a new business model and create a tech platform. But one of the things I found is, SMEs are essentially what the economy relies on for growth. We have all of these 2.4 million business owners, and the finance industry and everyone expects all business owners to be financially literate. They expect them to know what gross margin is. They expect them to know what debt service coverage ratio is, liquidity ratio. And the majority of business owners did not start their business as an accountant. They started their business because they created something new, they invented something. And what I found when I would go out and work with a lot of businesses was they would say, oh yeah, go speak to my finance person, or my bookkeeper's coming in on a Thursday. And so I did a lot of research into this, and there are very poor levels of financial literacy generally in the public. Now, maybe in this room, no, because we're in the fintech industry. But if we're talking about serving business owners, which is what I do for a living, we have to acknowledge that financial literacy levels are low. So if you're a lender, don't assume that your business owner knows what you're talking about. The OECD has done numerous reports on this, and it's a real, we have to get to the bottom of this. So for us, through funding, we don't just match them to funding, we're actually showing them the insights and the metrics, and we call it the Fitbit for their business. You don't necessarily know when your personal trainer says what your BMI index is, you just know it has to go down. And so it's about giving them those metrics that they have a greater attachment to their numbers. So as I say, I'm not talking about this audience in particular, I'm talking about the general public of business owners. And this is a global issue, it's not just specific to Australia. In Ireland, for example, the government did a survey on 53% of business owners did not actually look at their management accounts.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I'd like to go back to the funding aspect, and I picked what you said about that there is funding out there. So is it about organizations and ventures not knowing where to look or being only obsessed in a particular source of funding?
Yes. Well, it's not that they don't know where to look. It's a combination of things. Time. We have limited time. We're putting out 1 million fires every single day. You're focused on your customer. The other one is knowledge. You may not have the time to go Google everything. And again, that's why I started this. I was helping other businesses raise funding. I was doing loads of Googling. I was trying to match them to government grants, going down a rabbit hole, finding I wasn't eligible eventually. I didn't know when I was in Ireland that I could raise in the UK market and have those funds flow back to Ireland. So it was actually navigating that landscape and thinking, well, if I'm finding it this hard and I do this for a living, every other business owner and founder is going to be experiencing the same. So how can I deliver those results to them in a time-efficient way and remove all the admin side of it? So yes, it is like the more you know, the more options you have, right? So, and the more time you have. So you might be sitting here and saying, I've just got a no from my bank because I have no assets to secure a loan against, when in actual fact there are hundreds of lenders now, not just in Australia, as I've said, that will absolutely look at that. And so, yes, it's about, if you think about it, the alternative finance market here when it started after year one was 100 million. 3 years later, it's over $1 billion, and we keep going. So optionality is there. You just don't have the time to curate that list of what is right for your business right now. That's what we do.
And based on your experience and work, what kind of options would you see as more mainstream or more famous?
Well, if you, again, banks, of course, actually in Australia, bank acceptance rates are very high versus other jurisdictions. So it's usually around 50%. In Australia, it's up at 80%. But actually, if you look at what they're approving, it's businesses with very strong balance sheets, with something to secure that loan against. The big issue, particularly in Australia, and it's not just Australia, but that growth capital, unsecured lending for 250,000 upwards. That is a real issue for high growth businesses that are asset light. But having said that, there are now multiple new products like revenue-based finance, even cash flow lending, large unsecured cash flow lending, that is out there. But again, these are emerging. Every quarter there's a new product arising. But if there is one gap I've definitely noticed here, it's that gap. And that's where we're filling it with lenders from other jurisdictions.
Now, I'd like to ask about your presence here in Australia, and also what has your experience been so far?
So experience so far and is, my God, it's really hard to set up a company with ABN. I was like, they still have fill in the forms and post the forms. And I always equate it to, you know, when you land in a new country and you can kind of get a feel for how easy or hard it's going to be to do business by the airport, how easy it is to get through the airport. Well, registering your company, so you're coming here, you want to invest here. Yeah, ABN, I think we were going to talk about what else can the ecosystem learn from other jurisdictions. ABN needs to get a really fine open API and become digitized. I think government, the government side of digitization needs to speed up a bit here. That was the hardest bit. We launched here during COVID, and I think it was a bit of a COVID myth. Oh yes, you can. We were, you know, having roundtable discussions with all the major banks, and we thought, oh, we're not at a disadvantage by being at home because everyone's at home in their kitchens. And so we thought, we launched here, it was fine, but the learnings are that if you truly want to launch in a market, you have to remember there's a customer at the end of that, right? You can never take your customer for granted. So you have to go and live, eat, sleep, drink the market that you're launching in. And that was my fundamental lesson. The difference between launching and running the business here during COVID and now is you start to pick up all the nuances of a market. You start to pick up, well, what you thought would work may not work. And I think that's probably my lesson of going international. We are in 5 markets now, and we launched here before the US. But we took all the learnings from here, and we took our time in the US to really get to know the market before we launched there.
So you would say that you don't have a one-size-fits-for-all international strategy, basically?
No, I think it's easy. Look, as tech companies, the easiest part of going into another market is your tech. Of course, you've built your tech to scale. You've built probably a framework where you can add on further APIs that are specific to that market. That is honestly the no-brainer bit. It's the execution bit. It's the finding the people. It's that you as the founder truly getting to know your customer and realizing, well, yes, SMEs universally have an access to finance issue, but what specifically are the issues in the market that I'm trying to serve? So that and the people side are the most difficult parts. What's new? What's new in the world?
If I may ask you, how long did it take till the decision to start looking into the Australian market and the moment you actually got in here?
Truthfully, a week. Yes, and that's thanks to Enterprise Ireland. Yes, it's his fault. Happily his fault. You know, it was COVID, and we had more time on our hands because we would have been normally out at conferences like this in our domestic market. So we had more time on our hands. We had done all of the fixing our systems internally, and Scott actually said, read all of this. We'd already looked at the Australian market because similar to the UK, CDR, alternative finance market was growing. The entire ecosystem was really starting to take off. But the speed with which we got here was literally a week. And then, as I say, you get the easy boxes ticked off, and then you realize it comes down to execution and people and knowing your market.
I really love your global perspective and your global thought leadership, and since you have presence in multiple countries and you have been in multiple countries doing business, how easy or difficult is for a fintech startup to actually go global?
I think every fintech has to think globally. There's no point in thinking domestically. Then you're not a fintech. Like, let's be honest here. You're solving fundamental issues in the system. I have not met a fintech yet who has not got a global outlook. Yes, we have to start somewhere. You have to build your market share. You have to build that product market fit. But as I say, I think the hard bit is not your tech. The hard bit is the people and the execution and knowing your customer and knowing the nuances. That is, there is just no getting away from it. You have to put in the investment of time. And I think fundamentally it has to be the founders that put that time in. What you have to do is make sure wherever your main market is, you've got everything systemized, set up, it can live and breathe without you, so that you can move on and invest as much passion and time into the next market as you did in your first one.
Do you think COVID has enabled that global mindset? Has it made it more easy or more difficult?
I think COVID actually has done a couple of things. And again, I'm being an optimist here, but we were just hearing from the minister there. Access to talent is that, access to finance and access to skills are the two stumbling blocks to growth for all of us. I think what COVID has done has created remote working. So all of us now have distributed teams, and that's the norm now. So our team, we have a team in Brazil, South Africa, UK, Australia. I mean, they're in multi-jurisdictions. And so we've just hired someone in Nigeria, and it actually helps us because we're now getting a 24-hour round-the-clock team, tech team. So actually, again, great that the minister, but we can't all wait for visas to come through. We can't all sit here and say, oh, I still can't hire another, front-end engineer. Now we just all go, it's remote first, if that's what you want. And most people have moved to hybrid working anyway. So again, I think our mindsets have changed. We don't just constrain ourselves to the market, which is our domestic market now.
And very briefly, what's your presence here in Australia? What do you do on the ground?
So we have a team of 10 and growing. And as I say, that's where you have to put the investment of time in to understand really what's the makeup of that team and what do they need next. Where's the market pull? So the market pull is slightly different here than it is in the UK. So then you have to build your team according to that. So but we're currently based in Sydney, about to open an office here as well. And yeah, we'll just keep growing as the market comes to us.
Brilliant. Before I'm going to open the floor for a couple of questions, in your experience and in your global reach, what could be some lessons for the Australian fintech ecosystem to take on board?
I think it's in a really good position. I think if you look at some of the CDR is so exciting. I can't tell you, when open banking launched in the UK in 2018, I mean, talk about MVP. Oh my God, it was the standard of the APIs, the data quality was just really something to be left desired. And when we started, the adoption was so low. I mean, it took a year to get the first 1 million active users of open banking, and now it is absolutely flying. So when we started, we had like less than 5% would integrate their bank accounts, and now it's 55%. And it's just becoming the norm. So if there's one thing, it's you have to create that virtuous system. So government has to say, make your tax payments via open banking. Banks have to not build an API that just is compliant. They should look at their peers in other jurisdictions that went ahead of them, and not just do an API, like see it as an opportunity, not a mandate. And so I think there's a lot to be learned. You can look at countries like Estonia, where their e-governance is it's world leading. So I think the more that we can reduce friction like that and create a virtuous cycle, it all comes down to engagement at the end of the day. Absolutely. For a finance ecosystem
Absolutely.
to work.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions, so I'm happy to open the floor and get questions from the audience. I'm sure there will be some microphones around, so feel free to raise your hand if you have any question for Andrea. Yes. Here.
Hi, thanks. And thanks for your presentation, Andrew. Really nice hearing from you. You mentioned something about Ireland and, the Enterprise Ireland. So are you incorporated in Ireland, and how do you expand globally? Are you incorporated in Australia as well, or how does that work?
Yeah, yes, our parent company is Ireland, and then we have subsidiaries in each of our countries that we operate in. And just by your accent, we went through the whole, how do we incorporate in the US? What's the best way for us to go? But yeah, all of them are subsidiaries at the moment. And in the UK, we have a branch and a subsidiary. little tip for anyone who's raising finance, it's got to do with you then have access to the early stage investment market in the UK. It's a tax relief scheme scenario, but yeah, they're all limited businesses in each territory and fully operational in each territory. And then our IP lives in Ireland, of course, and then we operate, obviously, a transfer pricing model back to Ireland for the IP.
Thank you. Any other question? I may just have one last for you. So what would be your final message? What would be some advice you would like to share with us in terms of how do we actually battle with all the uncertainty, all the volatility right now, and what's next to come?
See it as an opportunity. See it as an opportunity to show how your business can not just survive, but actually grow. I think recessions are where it all happens for young businesses. If the world was fine and there was nothing challenging going on, we would be fighting against the incumbents, and it's hard to get institutional customers to change their minds when the status quo is fine. They don't need to be thinking about these things. So I actually see it as the best time to be starting and growing a business. And then the other thing I would say is, don't just think globally for your customers, think globally for your finance and your fundraising strategy as well.
And what is your strategy as SWOOP for the next, let's say, couple of months and maybe 2023 as well?
It's to become the most loved funding platform in Australia for businesses, and then once I've that achieved, it's to do the same in the US. I truly want this opportunity of borderless finance and empowering every entrepreneur to be financially savvy and have access to that market, similar to the public markets. That's the phase I'm really trying to fix. Brilliant.
I love this borderless approach that you are experiencing and explaining, and I think this is really something that all venturers and all business owners need to take into account, that the world has no borders and there are so many opportunities. And I think technology is actually enabling that quite a lot, to reach out to talent, to reach out to funding. It's just a matter of maybe having that click in your brain and thinking beyond borders. Thank you so much for joining us today, and looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you
so much. Thank you.